The wind howled across the empty plains, brushing against the wooden cabin like an old ghost that had forgotten how to rest inside. A single lamp flickered. Against the rough-hewn walls, throwing long shadows over the worn table, a half-empty whiskey bottle, and a cowboy who had long since forgotten what warmth. Felt like his name was Clayton Hale, a ranch hand turned drifter, who once had friends, laughter, and dreams, until the frontier took them one by one these days. Silence was his companion, and the only voices he heard came from the coyotes in the distance or the memories that refused to die. It was a late autumn evening, the kind that carried the scent of snow. On the wind, when Clayton heard it, a knock, 3 gentle taps out here, miles from town. No, 1 knocked unless it was trouble. His hand went to the Colt revolver on his belt as he stood, boots creaking on the floor when he opened the door. The last thing he expected to see was a woman. And not just any woman. She stood in the doorway, framed by the grey dusk, her hair dark as midnight and her eyes brighter than any star he'd seen in years. Her dress was simple, travel-worn, but her presence lit the cold evening like sunrise. "Evening, sir," she said, voice soft but steady. "I was told you might be looking for a cook." Clayton blinked, unsure whether to laugh or believe his luck. "A cook," he repeated, lowering the pistol but keeping his guard. "Ain't no. One told me I was hiring." She smiled faintly, the corners of her lips trembling with exhaustion and courage. Then maybe it's fate. Instead there was something about her, a mystery behind the calm. Her name, she said, was Ilara, and she'd been traveling west after losing her family to fever back east. The nearest town had told her that the Hale place could use help, that a lonely cowboy lived there who worked from dawn till dusk and barely ate more than beans and whiskey. She wasn't wrong. He studied her for a long moment, the wind cut between them. Tugging at her shawl, finally he stepped aside. "You can come in," he muttered that night. The small cabin filled with the smell of stew. For the first time in years, Clayton watched her move around his kitchen with ease, as if she'd belonged there all along. She hummed softly while chopping carrots, her voice weaving through the room like a lullaby for a tired soul. He wanted to ask more, where she came from, what she'd seen, but words felt clumsy after years of silence. After dinner, he sat by the fire, and she joined him, her eyes reflecting the flame. "You're a quiet man, Mr. Hale," she said gently. "Quiet, safer," he replied. "Maybe," she whispered, "but it's also lonelier for a moment." The fire cracked between them, and in its glow he saw the truth he'd been denying, that all this time he'd been waiting for something he couldn't name, someone to remind him he was still alive. As the night deepened, Ilara fell asleep by the hearth, the light flickering over her peaceful face. Clayton sat there watching, the sound of the wind outside replaced by a warmth that spread through his chest, something deeper than gratitude, something dangerous. He didn't know it yet, but that knock on his door had changed everything, and though he didn't say it aloud, he knew the frontier had given him many battles, but this feeling stirring inside him might be the hardest one to fight. By the time the first snows came, Ilara had become part of the cabin's rhythm. She rose before dawn, kindled the fire, and filled the home with the smell of biscuits and coffee. Clayton worked the cattle and repaired fences with a strength born of habit, but now, for the first time, he had something to return to. A voice that asked how his day went, a smile waiting by the window when the sun dipped behind the hills. Days turned to weeks, and the quiet between them grew soft instead of sharp. He found himself talking again, about the war, about his lost brother, about the land he'd tried to tame. She listened with patience and kindness that felt like balm to old scars, and though neither spoke of it openly, something powerful hung between them, the kind of tenderness the frontier rarely allowed. One evening, as the storm raged outside, Ilara came to the porch, watching him mend a saddle beneath the lantern light. "You ever think about leaving this place?" she asked. He shook his head, slowly, used to not anymore. Why? He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "Because I finally got a reason to stay." Her breath caught, and for a heartbeat, neither spoke the world beyond that cabin could have burned, and neither would have noticed. But peace never lasted long in the west. One afternoon, a rider came from town, a man in a black hat, his face hard as dried earth. He called himself Brenner, said he was looking for a woman named Ilara, claimed she'd stolen something from him back in Kansas, money, maybe more. Clayton's jaw tightened as he stood between them, his hand near his holster. Ilara's voice trembled. "He's lying. Clay, I ran from him. He wasn't the man he pretends to be." Brenna sneered. "She belongs to me." The air cracked like a whip for a long. Still second. No one moved. Then came the sound of steel leaving leather. Fast, sure, final. The gunshot echoed through the hills. When the smoke cleared, Brenna lay still in the snow, and Clayton's hand shook as he lowered his pistol. Ilara fell to her knees, tears glistening in her eyes. "You didn't have to." "I did," he said quietly. "Ain't no man lays claim to a woman's freedom in my house that night." As they buried the stranger beneath the frozen earth, the sky above them burned with stars. It felt like the world had been reset, washed clean by the storm. Ilara looked at him through tears and whispered, "I never meant to bring trouble." He took her hands gently. Rough palms against soft skin. Trouble's part of life out here, but so's love if you're lucky enough to find it. Months passed, the snows melted, the grass grew tall again, and laughter, real laughter, filled the cabin once more. Sometimes, when the sun dipped low and the light turned golden, Clayton would sit on the porch and watch her, hang laundry or hum a tune, and he'd think about how a single knock had changed the story of his life. He'd once believed the frontier had taken everything from him. But now, he understood, it had simply been waiting for the right moment to give something back, something worth fighting for. And as the wind rolled over the plains, carrying the scent of fresh rain and wildflowers, the lonely cowboy finally smiled, because love, in the end, had found even him. If you felt this story deep in your heart, partner, hit that subscribe button and join our campfire circle. Every week, we bring the untold love stories and forgotten legends of the American frontier back to life. Saddle up, because the next story might just be the one you'll never forget.